Okay, most of y'all recognize this as Frankenstein, right? Everybody knows that. Well, not actually true. Frankenstein was the name of the doctor. This was the Frankenstein's monster, and they never really give him a name. In some of the later versions, he comes up with a name. In fact, they call him Proteus and like Prometheus. In fact, Shelley's novel, actually, in the original origin, was called a modern day Prometheus. And you can look into Shelley's writing on this. Wiki's got a whole new thing on it, and I thought about going through that with you, but it would probably take two 45-minute videos to go through all of that, and it's more of an in-depth study. And there are so many more people that have gone so much more into depth and wrote dissertations and their PhDs on this type of thing, where I don't need to be the one to explain all this to you. But she found a castle, and this was to go along with it. And that castle, along with local doctors and scientists at the time, had realized batteries and they'd make you twitch. And of course, they were working on things like frog legs, and you may have even done this in school. Well, they take a 9-volt battery in a little thing, and then you touch one to it, and then you touch the other, and it makes its leg twitch even though it's dead. And so you could maybe bring something back to life. I remember being a kid and thinking of a weird idea where in the futuristic wars they would take something that was like a horse and hook up a computer to it to run and stab it into all of its muscles and stuff and make it work and do even what it didn't want to do, but you're going to do it anyhow, and put weapons on them and run them into battlefields and stuff, and then people would be playing with the weaponry on the back of them in something like a video game. And whenever I thought of this, video games were like Pac-Man and crap and below. So there really wasn't something that was 3D that was anything like this. But it was a weird dream that I had at once. I have attachments to concepts like this. But I don't know whether to leave it on this picture or not. But there's a lot of variations. All of us know this variation and understand it, that he's got these bolts in his neck, and they're in his neck, although you might on Booberry and other things like that see the bolts in his head, which in a modern day science would make more sense, for if you hooked it up like that and shocked him, all you're going to do with positive on one side, negative on another, is fry that dude's neck real bad. And it would make even more sense if you were to take and put some conglomerate that maybe did something to his brain to try to get it back going. But that's got to be a fresh brain, extremely so. And that seems to be even more important. And this becomes really impossible idea. But you think that one of these probes would be around the heart, because if you can just jumpstart somebody's heart and get it all going, then you'd have somebody going. But we know now they'd be like brain dead. And you may have seen the young Frankenstein version of this, where they get the abnormal brain, and they needed a giant actor and a little platform shoes, and next thing you know, he's a giant. Because in a lot of these depictions, they pick somebody that was a giant or a Hulk in nature, and if you look at it, for some reason, instead of just taking a body that's intact and doing fine, and then putting a fresh heart in it and a fresh brain in it, which would be an impossibility to hook up your cortex and all the nerves and everything that go along with that concept. But if you were able to somehow pull that off, that'd be able to how you would get it going. Well, with the modern day embalming techniques, you'd have to catch somebody before that happened to them, and indeed the body starts rotting so quickly and rapidly off of that really you're just going to try to jumpstart somebody back that was already going, and without having to change that brain out in any situation. So this really becomes not really feasible in some way. But let's look at it in a different way. How far does this concept go back? For we're talking about this, but she got the concept from those ideas and a few others. But how far does it go back? Well, in her idea, it's stitched together, different arms and legs, and pieced back together. You've pieced together a man. And I've done a recent video about golems, and I thought about saving that for Halloween, for it goes with it, and doing the Frankenstein thing along with it. And I mentioned it in that. But hey, let's throw one out there. Let's have Halloween in July. like Christmas in July. Anyhow, so how far does it go back? Well, piecing a man together like golems and things and trying to make something, or a animated suit of armor that really kicks back in, that moves, but if you open up his face shield, there's nobody in there. That's a different thing. But you can animate a skeleton, turn it into a zombie, all of these types of things that relate to this situation that are in these Dungeons and Dragons games and Sinbad and all those things we saw before in movies. But if you think about it, even Osiris, he's somebody that is dead, and then they take his mummified body there and chop it all into pieces and throw it all away, and she gets it all back except for his phallus. They remake that out of gold, and then she perches on top of it like a bird. This re-inseminates her and makes Horus the Younger and so on. And anyhow, he would be an example of reanimation. You ever seen the movie Reanimator? Or take somebody and bring them back to life like that in a totally different situation. But it's again another concept that's kind of along that Frankenstein idea, if you will. And it sure made a Frankenstein's monster. But this idea of rebirth in one way, form, or another goes back in the oldest of all religions. For somebody's going to come back, or they're going to be there waiting for you whenever you die. One way or another, it's going to work out. And of course, taken back in mythology and something, and an idea that Frankenstein's monster comes back something like a creature or a person in Pet Sematary. You ever watch that show where the little circle and the sacred circle there, that of course goes with archaeoastronomy and everything, but the ground's gone sour. You don't want to do that there. What you thinking? Bury that kid out there. You ever seen the show? Because what's necessarily comes back isn't what necessarily went in. It seemed like the closer you get to time, whenever it happened, the less evil it was, and so on. And they play upon that, and Stephen King and Micmac burial grounds and so on. And I've made a video about that, and even the Wendigo. It's another Halloween thing that I did, which is a creature that they really don't portray much, that leads up to the point that there's this giant briar that they got to walk over, and they do not stop and do not look down. In the book, it's got a few other parts to that, but I don't think they could really, in their allotted time, go into depth much about other folklores to make it real enough to put it in a small way, or at least Stephen didn't want to very much. But there's a lot of different forms of this. I know we are all beloved to this one. In fact, Boris Karloff will forever be known for this, even though he had a lot of different ones. Just like Bela Lugosi is going to be known for Dracula, even though he did a whole lot of different ones, and the Mummy and all this other stuff, and all great makeups. You look at this makeup here, it's weird. They took it from being just a gray color to a grayish green, so it would show up odder on black and white, to where you knew something was wrong. It almost had that TV yellow situation where it was like, there's something wrong. What the hell is going on? Like somebody's sick or something. So it really wasn't as green as everybody goes nowadays. Sometimes it turns into a solid green situation, but it's really not. It's quite a bit pale with a greenish appearance, like you'd think whenever somebody's getting sickly or turning green, gonna puke or something along that line. But these bolts in the neck, they should be around the heart. In fact, something personal here I'll share with you is my father had heart problems, and he found out later in life, after a heart attack, that he had had him all of his life. In fact, he knew it at one point, and he faked it through the service to get into the fly voice and everything there. And what it was he had heart palpitations, but he knew how to control them. And if he couldn't get it in control with the little mental thing that he did, he could actually hold his breath and push, like what would make your face turn red, and it'd stop. But he had a heart attack, and whenever he went into the hospital for it and everything, they turned around and came back in the room like, "Well, you're a unicorn." And he's like, "What?" And, well, the Widowmaker vein is what stopped on his thing. And he's like, "What? That Widowmaker? That doesn't sound good." And he go, "Well, it's the one where the guy just kind of grabs his heart and falls over, and boom, and you never get another shot at restarting their heart. If it's other veins, a lot of times you do, but you may have complications. But this one, it's just the Widowmaker." But we're looking at it here, and we want to do some dye tests on you and stuff. Anyhow, long story longer, they did dye tests, and his veins from all these palpitations had grown around his heart more from all the other sources and other veins, and are really keeping it going. But shortly after that, in putting in some stents and things in other veins to make sure they were flowing much better and things, and there was no blockages going on, they gave him a defibrillator. Yeah, it's a heart monitor, and it was put up in his chest, up in his shoulder, right over in this area. But they moved it from where they normally did to not interfere with his golf swing, and they made sure of that. And it was a little thin thing too. It was half as thick as a pack of cigarettes and 3/4 the size. Really not that bad, like a flip phone, a little smaller than that. But it had enough battery charge to do things and straighten out his heart, and it was monitoring it the whole time. And I thought it was just amazing. So this wasn't the old, granddad's got a pacemaker situation. It did that, but other things. What did it do? Well, if his heart got out of a rhythm, it would start beating with it, slightly off, but the correct rhythm it's supposed to, just slightly shocking it to get the shocks to happen more in pulse right, and then go back to normal. If it went through a period of time where it kept getting an abnormal single, it would turn around and shock the hell out of you, and then start at the regular rhythm and then let it go. Which wasn't too cool, because out of nowhere it just shocked the hell out of you. In fact, he died, and it brought him back to life, and he stood up off the floor, didn't know what happened, felt like he had to pee, made a sandwich and so on. And whenever he told the doctors about this after having this happen with a pacemaker, they just laughed and looked at each other. And the family was real solemn at this moment, and they realized it all of a sudden, and they had kind of laughed the moment on. And he goes, "No, you don't understand. We're looking at the data here off of it. Your father died, and this machine brought him right back to life so quickly. It's like doctors were there with a defibrillator and going, okay, well, when's it going to happen? I don't know. You make a sandwich? Hold on a second. Good. Okay, well, I got to pee first, but let's make a sandwich." I mean, boom. It's amazing. But that little shocking effect, people have been using that for years. In a lot of ways, and in therapies and all kinds of stuff. In fact, in the old days of Wicca and witchcraft and everything, it's definitely a thing that's there. For they would take these amber rods, and you could rub wool on it, and still do this today, by the way. Just like you can rub a balloon and then it'll stick to the wall and everything. It'll create an incredible static form. But you can do that with that wool, and then you go over and touch somebody, and it'll put that big arc shock right in between you. You've done this before, and surely you've had it where the carpet on your ground, and you walk around, special times of the year, it's even worse, and you'll get that little static built up, and then if you touch somebody or something, it'll catch you off guard and shock the piss out of you. Or it seems like it is. It just really catches you off guard, because after it's happened a couple of times, you'll go over and rub it, and then go over knowing it's going to happen and touch your sister, and but it isn't so bad whenever you're doing it, is it? As unexpectedly happening to you. But this electricity, our body works on electricity. Definitely so. And so this concept, back in the time she's pulling it off, working off these scientists that are going around in this area, in Frankenstein's castle kind of idea, has some reality to it in modern day. Through a strange way, defibrillators and things have all come out of this. But this wasn't actually that. This wasn't somebody's dad passed away and we put a defibrillator on him and brought him back, is it? This is something different. For if you look at the earliest looks of him, it's quite different. Here's Christopher Lee as the creature, and he's kind of eat up. Kind of looks 3 days dead anyhow, or more. He did a great vampire, though, too. Christopher Lee was fantastic. Loved it when they pulled him in on the Sauron idea. The guy just has a presence. But here's one that doesn't have Boris Karloff as the other picture was made to look like. Here's one where it's Glenn Strange, who's a bigger guy, and it would almost look like the Munsters version of it, wouldn't it? Yeah, it's a little different. Staples in the forehead, same old situation, kind of mocking him in a way. That was in 1944, though. But if you'll go back, there's been depictions of this idea of this big old giant Hulk running around and somebody made a monster about editorial cartoons and stuff back in 1896, way before anybody made a movie about it. But the first movies that were made about it were a little different than what you see here. I don't know if it shows up pretty well, but look on his right cheek over here. You can see that blemish. Well, it was meant to be like a lightning strike. It hit the guy, but it didn't show up on camera as well as it did in person, apparently. I don't know if they ever took and Turner did this colorizing of it or anything. True colored it back. It'd be interesting to see, but it would be like one of those movies where you'd want to leave it in that black and white so it has that feel, that old feel, that era to it. I always marveled on The Wizard of Oz and how it starts off in that feel and it breaks into a new world. Almost like your granddad's TV all of a sudden became modern, true color. There's a way to show off color, though, definitely. But here's one of the earliest depictions of him, and he has this raggedy hair and this chin beard hanging down and these long fingers like a lich. He's wrapped up like a mummy. This is Charles Stanton Ogle back in the 1910 film version they made. Here's a depiction for some books. The actor T.P. Cook is the monster in 1823 stage production of Shelley's novel. So they had a lot of this going on before Boris Karloff, and it came out with his exact variation and the ideas. You know, and the mummy's a good one to do about this too, and how that resurrects somebody. So there they are. Of course, the mummy in those shows is supposed to be the protector of everything, but we come to find out, no, that's the dude. That's actually him. And so in the modern form of it, that resurrects this guy that they didn't want to really resurrect, right? Yeah, the one with Brandon in it. But this guy was a huge guy too, and it takes somebody with a huge guy and to be able to play it off. And so it's always looked at as this giant type of thing. In this depiction, it looks like his legs are made out of somebody different than his body. His head's almost not put on right and kicked off to the left. But this is Frankenstein becoming disgusted at his own creation. So this is the one we're always going to love and refer to. And he couldn't really talk. And remember, he meets the old man, but the old man can't see him and doesn't judge him. Yeah, there were a lot of teaching tools here with this idea too. So he wouldn't judge him if he couldn't see him and all these type of things. But tries to give him a cigar and everything, but fire burns fire bad. Symbolistic things like that comes out of it, and they released primordial man. In a lot of the ways he's looked at as being like an Adam type situation. In fact, they made Frankenstein's bride, where she has that streak in her hair and everything, right? They even put her again in Bride of Frankenstein, but they also put it in Young Frankenstein,